And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to introduce our topic. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, you can see the image on the screen. If you can read, you know the title is Fireside Chat. So we're about to get spooky with it since 'tis the season and all that. And we're going to start by letting our guests, in no particular order, we're just going to let the Brady Bunch squares dictate, introduce themselves and what they're known for. So Griffin Barber, you get to be first.
I'm Griffin Barber, a retired police officer. I've written a lot of science fiction, mostly alternate history with Eric Flint. Before he passed, Peacock Throne, and before that, Mission to the Mughals, as well as a couple of other novels, but primarily Second Chance Angel with Casey Azell, and a lot of short stories that I put out through Bain and through the Granville Gazette as well. I've pretty much written across the genre, and I'm excited to be here and talk about horror because I'm a huge horror fan.
And for all of Steve's fans, we are sorry, but your liver, you might as well just surrender that and order a new one. But next is we've got Declan Finn. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Sure. Declan Finn. I've published about 30 books so far, probably going to be 35 by the next few months. I am best known for being a pain in the ass online, but also for cranking out books every 3 weeks. Right now, my biggest series is the action horror, Saint Tommy NYPD, which the last book of which just came out this month, Blue Saint. So
outstanding.
Yeah.
Next, we got the aforementioned Steve Diamond, who's a horror writer. If you didn't know that, by the way, Steve, can you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Hi, I'm Steve Diamond. Like you know, I'm a horror author. So for all those people out there, take a drink. So anyway, yeah. There we go, Tony. She's doing it the healthy way, though. She's doing it with water.
Great.
No, it's perfect.
Atta girl. It's so clear. We don't know it's water.
Yeah, I write fantasy, horror, science fiction. I write whatever people want me to write, but I always try to inject a little horror in there, make everyone out there a horror reader, one little sentence, one little theme, one little story at a time. My most recent novel is Servants of War. Came out through Bain with my good buddy Larry Correa. I refer to it lovingly as a dark fantasy horror novel, and yeah, it's pretty awesome. Larry and I had a blast writing it, and yeah, that's pretty much what I write.
All right. Next, we have Miss Tonya Weiskopf. Did I pronounce that right? I should have asked in the beginning. I never remember.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, that's it.
So who are you and what are you known for?
I am the publisher of Bain Books, and that's pretty much what I'm known for. I have one book-length writing credit to me, and that is for a nonfiction book that I did called Greasy Grimy Gopher, which is about the subversive verses that you hear when you're a child, and then you forget until somebody says something, and you get a memory cascade. And Greasy Grimy Gopher Guts is one that many of us know. See, you're getting one now, aren't you, Paul?
Yeah. It's the camp song. Come on.
Exactly. So much fun. I did that with a pal of mine, Josepha Sherman, over at August House. But mostly what I'm known for is publishing Bain Books, and we publish mostly science fiction and fantasy. We do tiptoe over into dark fantasy every now and then, as we did with Servants of War. And we're publishing Simon R. Green now and some of his dark fantasy series as well. I think of them as cozy dark fantasy, which is about my speed. Yeah. So I won't say horror.
All right. And then last but not least, we got you, Paul E. Cooley. Can you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
I'm Paul E. Cooley, author of The Black, The Derelict Saga, Station 3, Garaga's Children, a whole bunch of other stuff. I write across suspense, thriller, sci-fi, horror, historical fantasy, and whatever else jumps into my brain. I've been podcasting my novels since 2010. So shadowpublications.com has been alive and well for a very long time. We're finally rolling out the Black re-release. So first book is out. We'll be dropping the other first 3 fairly soon, and then next year all the new stuff comes out.
Outstanding. And he had the best tagline for any horror writer: "Nobody promised you happy ending." So that was kind of glorious.
We don't believe in happy endings.
I wish I had thought of it first, but and Nick's just here to hold everyone's hands if they get a little scared. So just send him your emails if you've got questions. You need a little encouragement. Nick will do it the Ranger way.
Yeah, cry harder. You get up.
There you go. All right. So now that we've got the cry closet squared away, we're gonna start
Why
this
are you
off.
hiding?
So we're gonna jump right.
Like a man.
Exactly. And so now we're going to jump right into the topic of the night, which is horror. So we'll start with, let's see, what does everyone think makes a horror a genre? Like what are the defining characteristics of horror?
Well,
I know we'll go broad.
I think for American horror in fantasy in general, you start with H.P. Lovecraft, right? I mean, he was the one who set the tone for what American horror was going to be. Now, of course, there was horror long before Lovecraft, but he's the one who really sort of set the bar and is still influencing writers today.
I've always thought of it as fear, dread, and shock. You start with the fear, the thing that you're scared of. Everyone's scared of something. And then the dread, when you feel it closing in on you, when you feel it starting to circle around your feet and start widening and sway up your legs, that's the dread. And then the shock is when the moment hits, when the thing bites you, or when you have that sudden realization that you're not alone. And those 3 things to me are what make horror what it is, and that's the funnest stuff to write for me.
That's definitely sleepaway camp.
So Declan, what do you think makes horror? It's not sparkle princesses and such, I take it?
No, and for the record, vampires only sparkle when they're covered in napalm and ignited. Trying to remember who I stole that from, if I stole it from anybody, but I know I've used it a few times in my books. Now, horror is basically when you're relatively certain, when you have to convince yourself at 3 a.m. that, yes, that's just the house settling. Honest it is. That's not something in the house. Oh, good. That shadow really does come from a 3-dimensional entity, and it didn't just generate on its own. The vague uncertainty at the periphery that makes you go, I did just imagine that, right? And you're not entirely certain of what exactly is going on, and you're not entirely certain of your own senses, where you're uncertain to even trust yourself. And that's part of what I've tripped over in horror. Granted, I fell into the genre by accident by combining research into serial killers and research into demonology. And, then it's like, oops, I was writing urban fantasy. I think I've written a horror novel. Oh, well, what can you do?
We can start the debate over what the delineation is between the two.
That's actually one of the questions we had for later.
later.
So Griffin, what about you?
Well, for me, I kind of differentiate between reading it and writing it. For me, writing it is a way to work through the horrors that I've experienced, the things I've seen and had done around me and stuff like that, so that I can kind of process some of that into prose and work through it, explore it, kind of figure out what made it horrific for me, and perhaps give some kind of guideline for somebody else who comes after to not experience quite the same way, or to maybe deaden some of that shock and horror. So
you're describing horror as your personal therapy. I can dig it.
Yeah.
That's why I started writing too, so I can appreciate that. So Nick, I know you write comics. Have you written any horror picture books for us? Is that something you participate in?
I'd say the closest thing that I have to a horror book is Bengali, mainly just because it deals with some H.P. Lovecraft, the old ones type mythology. Before the Big Bang, the creatures that ruled that. Bengali derives its power from that. So I've always wanted it to be more like a horror book, kind of like Spawn, but like dialed to 11. And we're getting there. We're getting there slowly and surely. We're starting to deal more with the occult, so it's not just a superhero that's going up against your super villains that are like a Doctor Doom or thing like that. Like we're gonna start dealing with some really heavy stuff.
So does horror present the same way when you're doing graphic novels, when you have to actually use pictures to paint the picture as opposed to words?
I think I always think that comic book writers have the deck is already stacked against them anyway, because you can only do so many words. You got captions, you got word balloons. You don't have pages upon pages upon pages that you can really flesh out the world. You got to rely on the artist, and hopefully the artist is worth its salt. But you have to tell a story with those words as well. So I think I've read a lot of. Look at The Walking Dead. That's a horror book. Mississippi Zombie by Bradley Golden. There's some really good horror comics out there that when you read them, and I'm glad I read them in my 40s, because if I read them when I was a teenager, probably would have scared the hell out of me.
I was reading horror comic books when I was younger.
Tales from the Crypt. What was the one with the witch? It was all part of the same deal. You had the Crypt Keeper. Cool. Yeah. Eerie. I remember reading those too, and they used to scare the hell out of me.
Right. And there were weird westerns too, where you had ghosts and there was a haunted tank too. I think DC had that one. That wasn't really horror, except where you touched on the horrors of war, right? Yeah. We're about to co-publish the Black Tide Rising graphic novel over at Bain, which is not horror, but it is a zombie apocalypse. And it actually goes darker than the books do, because you're seeing graphically what the zombies are doing to people, and it's horrific. So I think it's a hard line to walk when you're doing the graphic novel in horror. You don't want to make it too over the top.
The problem is the Washington Park Square scene. This Washington Square Park scene is now current events.
Yes. Oh no. We are living in Ringo's zombie apocalypse. This is not a good thing. I'm just hoping that we eventually get to the rebuilding society part of it.
Well, first you have to go through the shooting the zombies in the head part, which right now is kind of illegal.
It is. Allegedly. Yeah. No, I think you guys brought up something about where I think Lovecraft, ties into this, and what Declan was talking about too. That, and Paul and Stephen, you're talking about that realization that you're not alone, right? And what Lovecraft was talking about was this cosmic horror. It's like, we're not alone in the universe, and this is bad, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's more along the lines of everything is at risk. Everything that you've made what if you woke up one day and gravity was upside down?
Oh, so cool.
No, it would not be cool at all.
No, I'm rolling the dice on this one. I think it'd be pretty awesome.
Unless you consider the biological effects as well as just where you stand, like your blood pumping differently, like all those kinds of things that may flip it. What happens if it turns sideways and you're stuck on that sideways? You have to. My point is that it is the uncanny. It is knowing all of these laws that we have based our lives around, that we know, that we have seen, that we've heard, that we've experienced, we've touched and felt. Taking all of those things and skewing them, using them against the character, using them against the person. It's not that the dark is scary; it's the absence. It is the unknown that is in there. And that for some reason, darkness always promises creation. Light always promises death, because light can't do anything but dim. until it goes to the darkness. That's kind of the way I think about it.
That's a very elaborate way of touching on what Romero said about horror is disrupting the apple cart.
Yeah, it's throwing everything. It's throwing everything off. It is basically, you take all these kinds of fears that we experience every day, like being crushed in a crowd. That of zombie. If you look at a zombie horde, what is that? I mean,
That's
it's a mosh pit. It's basically getting crushed to death. That's exactly what it is. That's what those hordes are. It's claustrophobic, getting stuffed into an elevator, having a bunch of zombies outside a closed space. Those things do that to us because we all have had the feeling of being trapped. They all have to do with the feeling of not knowing this person who's too close to me. Mm. It's all about that. And it's also all the other things that we were told as children, that we've seen in movies, that we've read in books, everything that we've experienced. All of that can be used against you. And I think
you've accurately described my first marriage.
Well, you're definitely a horror writer.
Eventually. I got a whole bunch of people here to learn from.
So you were going to say, Tony?
No, just saying that went dark very fast. So.
That was the dark part. What mentioned me the first part.
I think that's what makes horror actually work across genres, because we've had this conversation ad nauseum on DRS. Horror is not itself a genre any more than suspense is a genre, any more than thriller is a real genre. Those are all facets of genres. They all get stapled together. And you want to muddy the lines even further? Look at Star Wars. It's science fiction fantasy. Okay, which is it?
No,
it's neither. It's its own thing.
It's both and neither at the same time.
It's both and neither.
It's science fantasy.
It's space fantasy, which has been around for a very long time, right?
Absolutely, but it's not. It's when you call it space fantasy, you ask people, it's science fiction. Where do you put horror in that? Where do you consider something like Hell House versus a zombie flick? One is all gore, one is all terrible and violent. And
there's subgenres within horror as well. So I mean,
but see, I don't think that's the answer to it. Go to the bookstore and look at the horror shelf and look what's on there. 5 Stephen King books and nothing else.
Which bookstore should I go to, since they're maybe some?
Last time I was in the shithole that used to be known as Barnes and Noble, they actually did have a horror shelf that's about all I had. That's
Stephen King.
But the thought of I believe that there is such a thing as genre. You can have something that's horror, but within that you're going to have you will often have, not have to, but you will often have elements of other things going on. Especially because you can have body horror without anything other than somebody who's mentally ill murdering somebody in
an umbrella,
stunning way. So, and that is not something you're going to find elsewhere except for maybe true crime.
Here we go again. We get into suspense thrillers. We get it. Where does Hannibal Lecter fit in that?
Well, he's a fictional character, so again, it's it's not only psychological but also the body horror, because the things he does, the cannibalism, etc.
I had somebody tell me, "Oh no, Silence of the Lambs, it's a thriller. It's not horror." They knew that I did not like to see horror movies. You can go see it. It's brilliantly done.
This sounds like something I would do.
I don't consider it horror.
Well, you don't. But I had to go see another shitty movie before I could go home.
What you're saying is you were forced to watch something that wasn't your taste. And see, that all goes back to what I was getting at, which is the marketing aspect. Because you have the crosses that go back and forth.
See, I don't know. I think that in some ways you're right. Horror is a technique that you can apply in many genres, right? But it's also its own genre, right? And all genre is a set of expectations that you raise in the reader, right? And so when you label something horror, when you got that black cover with the drippy, with the drippy type on it, it tells you that the reader is in for this particular kind of experience, right? Where nobody promised you a happy ending. Right? But Paul is
going to that massage parlor.
I don't run massage parlors, bro.
So by that definition, because the body horror would count, would you guys consider something like Kafka's Metamorphosis then to be a horror story?
Yeah.
Can be.
It's not. Come on.
Not well enough read. I don't know.
But
I thought everyone in English class had to read that.
Well,
Is it coming to pop up?
it has that change. It has that, that sudden weird something weird happens that's contrary to everything that we know, and then bad shit happens after.
Gregor wakes up as a cockroach. What are you going to do? It happens. I mean, you don't have to complain about it for 90 pages.
Some of the interesting things about horror is that, and we're starting to delve into this, and that's the subjectivity of it. And that's that what some people would consider horror, other people wouldn't. Correct. I get this question all the time when someone comes up and they, I'm selling a show or whatever, and they say, oh, well, what do you write? And my first response is not, well, I write horror. No, my first response is, well, what do you like to read? Do you like supernaturally stuff? And if they say yes, I say, oh, what do you like horror type stuff? If they say yes, then I say, well, that's great. I write horror. If they say no, I say, well, I mean,
so you're telling us you're lifting your skirt slowly.
I say I write supernatural thrillers, of course.
Of course.
And for a lot of people, just simply saying that is enough to change what they're perceiving in their mind, right?
Absolutely, it's wordplay.
And even though the content of my book doesn't change, there are tons of readers out there who will say, "Oh, well, yeah, Steve writes a horror novel. That's what Residue is. It's a horror novel." But then you'll have an equal number of people who, in the very next review will say, "Oh, yeah, this wasn't near scary. This isn't truly a horror novel." And that's because it's so subjective.
That's one of the things too, though, is that we can confuse horror with scary. That's also the jump scare is not necessarily intrinsic to the place of horror. It's also somebody getting zapped when you didn't expect that hero to get zapped. The Departed is a great example of that in film.
Dude,
what?
Everybody.
Spoiler alert for you holes who haven't watched the movie in 20 years.
You nailed it with that. Like when that scene happened, the elevator door app opened up, and I was like, all right, cool, man. This guy's finally getting. No, what? No. You changed that.
Was your response horror or was it shock? Or was it?
It's the shock.
Surprise.
Both, because I was emotionally invested in that character.
Yeah, it's the tragic loss.
It's the tragic loss, and I think that's an element of horrors because if you're doing horror right, you give a shit, and that's how I write comic books. And that's how I judge comic books.
Right.
Why do I care about this dude or dudette? I'm from California. It's gender neutral. Why do I care about these people? And if I care about them, then with the bad stuff that happens to them affects me personally because I have a emotional vested interest in this character and I want to see him succeed. So when stuff like that happened in The Departed, I'm like, well, then someone needs to go for that.
Right.
Someone needs to be avenged here. I'd form a team.
So question, does horror have to be a tragedy?
I'm sorry, what?
Have what?
Does horror have to be a tragedy?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so, but it definitely helps.
Certainly the slasher movies, it's always a tragedy.
Oh,
they always do the smart thing, and they always choose the stupid thing to do.
Slasher movies are the reason why you say
comedy,
horror,
not
and
tragedy.
90% of people who don't like horror get turned off because all they do is they think about chainsaws and knives and horror.
And stupid teenage protagonists.
Well, that too.
It's like, one of the best lines about, just to sum up, Stephen King was a line from Larry Correa, where if he had written Cujo, it would be a 5-page short story. 3 of those pages would be a debate about what caliber to use on the bloody dog.
That is a good question, though.
There we go. But killing the dog is always sad, right? So this is.
And you can't do that. You can't.
No, when it's rabid, you just shoot the damn thing.
You also can't do that in the first 5 pages of any book because you get all the PETA nuts will be all over you.
Tell it to John Wick franchise.
I think if it's rabid, they might give that up.
But would you discover that it was rabid in the first 5? I guess.
Yeah, you kind of know.
I like King personally. I think his short fiction is so much head and shoulders above any of his longer form.
Oh yeah.
And certainly it's the short fiction is like, it's not an entirely different level than anything that's been made into a movie by him.
All right. Well, we're going to take a moment because I promised them I'd keep this at an hour. So we're at that point where I pause for a second and shamelessly shill for the man.
35 awesome stories started by one kick-ass meme. It started as a joke. Storm Area 51, they said. They can't stop all of us, they said. But all laughter has stopped when the U.S. Air Force mobilized and pulled out the big guns. However, relentless mockery and derision by the media and the powers that be pushed the dweebs and alien enthusiasts too far. What else were they supposed to do? They said why not and showed up, determined to find out what secrets were hidden behind the walls of the clandestine government facility. Are you brave enough to buy this anthology today? If you are, find out what the government wants to keep hidden. Read Storming Area 51, a Bayonet Books anthology.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that brief commercial interlude. Nick was excellently expedient in his refilling of the beverages. I'm sure it's healthy in water. His doctor, if you're watching, like it's water. Good.
I don't have a doctor.
Whatever. But so we were talking about what makes it horror, and I'm not widely read in horror, so I appreciate you guys making my job really easy where I could just mute and listen to you guys go back and forth. It was totally enjoyable. But something Declan said earlier during the introduction about what is horror. So I was wondering if you guys think is there a difference between horror and psychological thriller? And we will start off with you, Declan, since you brought it up earlier.
That's a good question, and I have no idea. No, there's a lot of overlap, obviously. You could say that Silence of the Lambs was psychological thriller because, seriously, what is so scary about, Anthony Hopkins in a glass cage, right? But no, he pulled it off. And let's face it, it just was that creepy. But then again, in the film, most of that was his acting. In the book, a lot of that was the psychological profiling stuff done by Thomas Harris, and he's one of the few people the FBI serial killer folk has said, oh yeah, he actually showed up to the lectures and he took notes and he asked questions. So it's going to depend a lot on, are you focusing on the movie where the creepy part was mostly Anthony Hopkins and the lighting director, where his eyes were either glowing, or they were dark wells of endless, despair. Yes, he was a Lovecraft character. Or is the creepy part, their 6'5" actor Ted Levine wearing human skin and thinking he was Ed Gein. What? Sorry?
Go with that one.
I'll recreate that scene right here for our audience.
Oh no, that's okay, man.
No thanks. But
let's get up pretty horses here.
But yeah, it really depends on which one you're talking about, book or movie. And with the movie, it was all down to the actors. Most Ted Levine, I really hope I'm getting his name right. Where again, it's like he's 6'5" and kind of creepy.
Okay, so
should I just keep talking?
Well, that's a good point to ask if anyone else has opinions on psychological thriller versus horror. Steve, you've been mostly quiet today, so I know you can talk. I listened to your podcast, so I'm gonna let you weigh in.
They're not mutually exclusive. I think that's probably the best way to say it. Like they can, they're friends with benefits. Does that help?
There's overlap.
So those they can obviously go together. I mean, anyone who's watched Alfred Hitchcock knows that that those two things go together. I mean, one of my favorite horror movies ever, and I call it a horror movie because of the contextual horror that's within it, is Rear Window. Okay. Most people look at that and they just think of Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day, right? Grace Kelly, you're right. Thank you. So they just think of Jimmy Stewart in his like leg cast taking pictures and being a spy, spying across the room.
Voyeur.
Yeah, but there are moments in that film where it's purely psychological for him. I think of the main shot that I always talk about is when his girlfriend is across the road or across the courtyard, and the way the scene is shot is that there's a window, and then there's a big block of dead space that you can't see through, and then a window, right? And you see her going through room by room, piece by piece of the room, and then the bad guy comes home, right?
Raven
And so
Burke.
Jimmy Stewart is just sitting there. He's just sitting there. He can't do anything. One, he can't call the cops. He can't get out of his chair. It's not like they have cell phones. He can't go over there. He doesn't have any guns, so there's nothing he can do about that. And there's these moments where it's this very close-up shot on his face, and you see the stark terror, you see the stark fear, the dread, you see all of that within his face. And if you look at that scene and you can't say that that's psychological horror, then I don't know what you're watching. And that's the reason why I love a lot of these things. It's because you can take any of these elements that you want and you can inject them into anything. That idea, that stark terror that he was feeling, you can inject that into any fantasy story. You can inject into any science fiction story. Heaven knows we've all probably done that, right? You can put it into any comic book. Doesn't matter. Like, you put that into anything that you want. And like I always say that horror is like bacon. It just makes everything better, right?
Yes.
Or jalapenos, whatever. I mean, I don't judge.
Or put them together.
Exactly. So, these are just tools in the tool belt, and they exist for you to have fun with, right? If you're not having fun when you're writing some of this stuff, yes, some of it, as Griff mentioned earlier, and I've certainly been there before, some of it is therapy, right? Some of it is working through your own issues and stuff that you've seen. But at a certain point, like, you're writing this because you enjoy writing it. You're writing it because, look, I mean, I was going through my short story collection when I was doing the edits, and I realized, like, of the 15 stories, I think there were like 6 torture scenes in it. I'm like, good grief, what am I doing? And then I thought, well, write what you know.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that, I wouldn't be doing this as therapy if it wasn't fun and effective. That's the key, is that it allows you to, I mean, I took a page for, really what I started doing it was talking to David Drake, because David Drake, military science fiction, yada, yada, yada. No, David Drake never stopped writing horror. He just changed milieu and explored the experiences he had in Vietnam. And if you read through Balefires that Bain put out, and what's the other, Demons, and I can't remember the older one.
Night and Demons, I think it is.
Night and Demons, yeah. If you read through those, you're like, oh, yeah, this guy is an accomplished horror writer, and was selling them to August Derleth at Arkham House back in '67, all the way through. And he was, after his experiences in Vietnam, he said he just experienced, was trying to get that stuff out. But in order to find a commercial success, he decided, because he was going to go, or actually, I think Jim convinced him to go and do something more military SF than anything else.
Yeah, military SF was not a commercial decision back when he was doing it. It was an anti-commercial decision. It wasn't until Jim put the books out at Ace that suddenly it actually military science fiction became a genre.
Right.
But I think you're talking about it as a tool, right? As an editor, I'm looking for something that's going to bring a reaction to the reader, right? That's going to get a visceral reaction, whether that's of joy or discovery or satisfaction. in horror, if you can pull it off, and I think it's very, very hard to pull off, right? It's hard to make it not campy. It's hard to make it actually scary, right? If you can pull it off, then you get that gut punch to the reader that you want in an effective piece of fiction.
It's very similar to comedy because it involves timing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's why Jordan Peele is so successful as a comedian and as a horror director. And he said it best. I watch a lot of horror, and I have to double down during spooky season. Like, we were having an argument, like, what do we watch tonight? Like, God dang, we've seen everything. What else is out there? So with Shudder and Hulu and all the other streaming services, like, we're deep diving. But I digress. So what Jordan Peele had said, the difference between horror and psychological thriller was budget. And I don't really. And I laughed at first. So I'm like, well, yeah, because there's movies that are considered horror. Like, I consider Silence of the Lambs horror. You know, it has many horror elements. It had many visceral reactions from, like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. You know, when Lecter takes out the guards while he's getting a meal. You know, it was very violent. It was very grotesque what he did. And I remember seeing that as a young adult going, holy crap. It's when I realized that human beings are the scariest thing you're ever going to run into.
Especially ones that don't have any facial expressions while they're doing it.
Yeah, and he's cold, he's callous, he's calculated, he's intelligent, he's an artist.
Which is exactly why Jason and Michael remain iconic to a certain degree, because they're faceless. Although I would argue that Michael is much more terrifying than Jason.
I would agree, because he's human. He's not zombified or anything.
Well, like I don't know if I would call it human if we go back to the shape, but still.
Human-esque.
Yeah.
We'll go on the category human-esque.
But he's more likely to set a trap for you than Jason, who's just likely to chase you with a freaking chainsaw, which I always found really annoying.
Right.
Yeah. And
so, I mean, Halloween could be a decent franchise if they do it right. Friday the 13th will never be a decent franchise. It's irredeemable.
But it's fun.
But yeah, it can be fun. When you're talking about camp, and you're talking about budget, the reason why found footage films really find their way into horror so much is because found footage and horror are matches made in heaven, because you can do micro budget stuff and make it scary as hell, or campy and buckets of blood, whatever you want to do there. You don't have to have, this massive production to make it happen. You look at a movie like Oculus or
Blair Witch. That played right into my imagination, and they didn't show me shit.
Exactly.
And it scared the hell out of me.
Yeah, you start wondering about reality, because you're hearing things that aren't there. You're seeing things in a mirror that aren't there. Are they?
A shadow that's cast naturally from a tree outside. And I'm like, oh my God, what is that? Am I next? Is Blair Witch going to get me?
Exactly. And that captures the entire essence of the psychological aspects to that, is playing with that. That's the thing I love the most about playing with it.
One of the coolest things for me about horror is it just is, we're talking a lot about film, but one of the best horror movies ever also spawned probably the best science fiction, military science fiction movie ever, which is Alien and then Aliens.
Yeah.
I mean, both of them have their elements of horror, but that first one is an amazing locked room horror, body horror.
It's a slasher flick. I hate to tell you, it's a slasher flick.
Okay.
Alien is it's tension, it's suspense,
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm simply saying it is a slasher flick.
Oh, it's totally a slasher. The Xenomorph is a slasher. That's his whole deal. Same with Predator. It's a slasher.
But I'm saying if you go back and you look at the amount of gore.
I'm sorry, but no, it's a lot worse than
close.
It's a lot worse than a slasher movie, because he disappears them, and as we eventually find out in the later film, the second film, he's taken them, or it is taken. The drone is taking them in order to impregnate them with other stuff. That is not slasher. That is straight up awesome body horror. And
the scariest part of that is the loss of agency of yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And
I think that's the most terrifying horror aspect. Like all of my favorite films, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is losing agency, losing control of yourself, not having control of your own body.
When you look at any like monster film, here's the way I've always looked at it. whether we're talking about zombies or vampirism or werewolves or any of the other fun stuff, I always look at monsters as a dirty mirror. So you hold up that mirror to yourself, and it's this is what I am without control, without agency, without XYZ, and that's what you end up with. And that's why so many things, like zombie. That's why zombies, to a certain degree, still work. That's why vampires can still work. That's why werewolves can still work. That's why all of these things can still work, and it's because of it's what happens when me as a human, when I lose all of that, right? What happens when I lose all of that?
And I think the difference between horror and psychological fantasy is that in horror we get to pretend that it's not humans, right? The fantasy element it takes it outside of humanity, right? It's something. It's not humanity that's doing this to us. We get to pretend for a little while that humans aren't the scariest thing that we're going to encounter.
But yeah, and I mean, my favorite piece of sort of short fiction ever is I Am Legend. Right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite pieces. I mean, frankly,
I love the book.
My favorite. The book. We're not going to talk about the movies. We're just going to pretend that doesn't exist.
I read the book and come
on, son.
I was like,
we're just going to pretend.
Come on, you can at least give a nod to the Vincent Price version, just a small.
Mega Man.
I'll give.
Mega Man's the closest film version of I Am Legend. It's the closest.
But the whole point of that story is that, Tony. It's who is the monster?
Yeah. Have any of you guys read Darker Than You Think by Jack Williamson?
No, but I'm putting it on the list now.
Oh, you should.
I got an editor telling me I should read this.
Yeah, I mean, you associate Williamson with hopeful science fiction and space opera, and his incredibly long career. But Darker Than You Think is darker than you think.
It's in the title.
That is the title. Yes.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, do you think that there are any specific tropes that have to be in there for it to qualify as horror, or is it just, as you discussed earlier, almost like the ambiance of the story?
I think it's got to evoke in the reader that frisson, right? That freaky hormonal reaction that you get to fear. But do you agree with that, Paul? Is that what makes it for you?
It just so depends. I mean, how do you deal with like a horror comedy? You can write a really horrific short story that has a lot of really funny beats, even though really horrible things are happening. And that's another element. You talked about horror and comedy being related. I think they're integral. They're just integral to one another.
Well, I mean, anybody who's been on a horrible crime scene or been ambushed or suffered an IED, they know that the only way to deal with the horror is to fucking laugh about it.
Yeah, ever been
the gallows humor. Doesn't
exactly.
really sit well in the civilian world, that I found out. But horrible shit has happened to me on the civilian side too, being in law enforcement, and the younger guys don't get it yet, especially if they've never been deployed, been overseas, things like that. But the older guys, we're having a riot because that's how we're dealing with this horrible thing presented before us. It's like, well, let's crack a joke and have a beer, and what the hell? This is so serious. I'm like, is it though? I mean, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, is it not entirely horrible, the situation? But
I grew up in Brooklyn, right? So, I mean, it's essentially the same thing, right?
Oh, yeah. New Yorkers are practically combat vets.
If you read Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, there's one of his essays in there, I think it's called Spin. He talks about all that there were just a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds and were stupid, did stupid shit, thought stupid shit, and did horrible stupid shit. And the fact is that at all times they had this milieu of unreality, all of it, because we're just a bunch of dumb kids. Guy goes up, blows up a puppy dog for fun. Who's going to do it to me? They sent me over here to die. Why not that? There's a certain kind of logic to it all that only makes sense in the moment. And that's why you have to bring, if you're talking about that kind of stuff, that's why you have to bring the audience along with you, the audience of the readers along with you into that for them to get it. Otherwise, it just sounds like a bunch of insensitive jackasses. You have to have some of that go through, and that also works very well with the horror element. You are basically, bringing these people along for the ride, and I think that's what makes it.
Say that in a Bane book, the person who blew up the dog is the bad guy always. Every single time.
Pretty much
you don't mess with dogs. You don't do that.
In this case, it was. If you haven't read the things they carried, it's nonfiction. It's nonfiction.
Oh,
that makes it better, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know.
That goes cut double. If I can kind of throw in something here, is what about when the perpetrator of your horror is your protagonist, your main character, and making them likable?
Now we're talking.
Dexter is a really cool example of that.
Oh God, yes.
Well, that's just the nature of the anti-hero, though. The anti-hero can do damn near anything. Look at the kind of stuff that Black Adam does in the comics. You look at the kind of stuff that characters you're talking about, like
Punisher.
Dexter or somebody like that. You go, or Spawn or any of those. They're all anti-heroes to a degree. They will do what we would consider with our logical, rational minds to be absolute ludicrous, heinous crimes that some of these people are committing.
For them, it's a Tuesday.
And part of that entire thing is the means to an end or end to a means. That's what makes the anti-hero so interesting, especially when they're not just going out of their way to make trouble. They're getting dragged along, and they're making trouble because they're being dragged along. And
but also to try and make them likable is what I was kind of driving at.
And you have to have them do stupid stuff and stupid ticks. They can't all be.
Going back to The Departed, Jack Nicholson, she felt funny. And apparently that was totally like he had said that he was going to do that beforehand. And it's like, you just keep the film rolling and I'll do
he did several takes.
And he just kept doing it. And they're like, oh my God. Because everybody was kind of horrified that here, Jack, I think you're a little too much into your character.
Well, that's every movie with him, though, isn't it?
Does Jack Nicholson act anymore?
No, he has never acted. He's always been Jack Nicholson reads this character. Jack Nicholson does this character. That's who he is.
It's kind of like Nick Cage. Nick Cage playing Nick Cage.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about. I mean, we were talking about Hannibal Lecter earlier, the TV show Hannibal, right?
Ooh.
Did you guys see that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Loved it.
So the scene, it's in season 2, I think. So much of it is from Hannibal's POV, right?
Yeah.
And there's the scene where he decides to throw a dinner party. So he has to go through. He's going through his Rolodex. He's like, who should I invite? Who should I bring? Except for that's the Rolodex for the ingredients.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you're pulling it out, and as you're watching it, maybe this says more about me than anyone else, but I just start laughing. I'm like, this is hilarious.
There's a lot of dark humor in that show
because it's so in character, right? It's so in character. It makes sense, but he's the villain. There's no question. He's the villain.
And there's also the horror in the mundanity of it.
Well,
it's just absolute mundane,
But my understanding though is that I saw it at one remove. My husband watched it, so I didn't have to. So I got the summary. It's about as close as I wanted to get. But that he was the part of what he was doing was revenge, right? He was getting the people who had tortured and killed his family, and so that when you're making the anti-hero likable, part of what you're doing is giving yourself a powerful revenge tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dexter or the Punisher or what have you. And they're allowed to go to extremes that you are not allowed to.
And we allow them to do that.
Yeah.
As we watch.
Yeah.
Because when have we not ever just thought like, man, I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that guy.
Not interested in meeting too many people. So,
allegedly.
I have alleged. One of my favorite shows is Letterkenny, so I'm going to go with allegedly.
To be fair.
To be fair.
To be fair.
So we've talked a little bit around circles, and the conclusion I've come to about what is horror is it's whatever you want it and need it to be, and then everyone can argue about it ad nauseum, and that's part of the fun of the
It's adaptive,
thing.
JR.
It's like porn. You know it when you see it.
That's exactly what I was going to say a little while
Or
ago,
art.
but I was afraid to do that because I figured everybody would pile on top of me and say that was cheap. So you know what,
I
Declan, that
pile
was
on top
cheap.
with you and agree with you.
All right, well, I chose that word too. I figured it would get a response. It did.
Maybe not the one you were looking for. What are you doing later?
I don't want to know what's going on beneath the camera there, Bubba.
Just
Paul,
so
I'm
everybody's clear,
Paul,
that's
how
actually
you
from a
feel?
Supreme Court decision.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember.
So-
I was
I-
alive and actually aware of what the SCOTUS was doing at that point.
There you go.
So what do you think as we start, looking to wrap this up? What do you think it is about the genre of horror, whatever that means to you, that makes it so popular? It's almost one of the oldest methods of telling stories. Since there were campfires and proto-humans sitting around them, they told scary stories. So what is it that makes it so intrinsic in the Homo sapien sapien makeup?
Adrenaline hit. You don't get it in your standard. You don't get it in your day-to-day life unless you're, getting shot at on a regular basis. If, most civilians, what do they face? And, fine. I go outside my door. I live in New York. I carry weapons that I'm technically not allowed to because I've got my own adrenaline hits. But, allegedly. Normal people don't have that. So horror movies.
Yeah, I mean, you step out onto a subway platform, you're taking your life into your hands. Shouldn't have to be that
Or
way.
someone else's. What if I gave that little
Allegedly, yes.
Especially if you're singing "I'm Your Pusher."
But I mean, all right. So we're dealing with the horrors of reality, right? We take it into ourselves, and we take it and we fictionalize it, and we try to deal with the horror that we see over and over and over again. And then that's that's why I think we have a horror genre. That's why it goes back so far. Also, the adrenaline rush. That's yeah.
Every time you kill a monster, you're killing part of your fear. And I think every time that you bring a character to victory over, well, even if it's Pyrrhic, victory over one of those types of obstacles, it's almost like you're getting that way. You're getting over that hill too. And horror provides a way for you to make the stakes so abysmally high, and it's so personal. It's what the threat of an atomic bomb can't do anything to me because there's nothing I can do about it. If there's something in the darkness that I can't see and I'm alone and I'm trapped in the house, there's nothing else I can do but try and deal with it. I'm forced to deal with it. That's the horror of the situation. There's no help. And I think that's part of getting into that is, does it hit you and give you those goosebumps? Do you have that visceral reaction where you can put yourself in that character's shoes and go, oh shit, and try and figure out whether or not you'd even be able to move, let alone the character.
Jaws is scarier than, Dr. Strangelove.
Yes.
Kept me out of the water until I was like 18.
I know some people who still won't go in the water after they saw that flick.
I know people who
made me a scout swimmer on a Zodiac team. Made sure I was out in the water every chance they got.
So what is it that makes, speaking of Jaws, it's an iconic movie that still people talk about all those years later. What is it that makes some properties stick around in the cultural zeitgeist while others just fade away into obscurity and no one's ever heard of them?
Continuous fear.
Yeah, the commonality.
The fear you can't get over. We don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore to fear.
Kind of also want to combine the last two questions. So for me, it's transgressive. It allows us to watch a horrible transgression against somebody or against societal rules. It allows us to witness that without harm. And that is huge for us, our ability to explore what might that be like for my buddy who was blown up several times in IED explosions. What must that be like for someone whose parents were killed when they were little and they witnessed it? What was that be like? It allows us to explore this transgressive material that is inherently wrong if it were to actually happen without harm. And I think that is just an enormous tool for anybody, and including myself, but anybody who wants to try and figure out what it's like to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes.
In a safe environment, which is
what
great.
continues to work, Jaws, Alien, these other films in the rearview mirror, it's because they continue to be transgressions and scary to this day, because of we're still lizard brain wired to kind of feel this way about things.
For me, it's the primal nature of it. Like, if I say, oh, well, I'm scared of fall leaves. I don't know. I'm scared of something really like very, 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 very targeted and specific. That might have a flash for a very specific group. But things that are more primal, those things have a longer relevancy, I think.
It's the spiders hiding in the falling leaves. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's the idea of, you're sticking your hand into the hole.
Oh,
right?
Stop it.
It's you're swimming you're swimming in the water in the ocean, and your visibility is only 15 feet down, but the ocean is 100 feet. These are the things that I worry about. It's even more primal than that. It's loss. It's the loss of family. It's the loss of like we've said before, control. When you start dealing with those very basic things, and if you can integrate those into your stories, they have a much higher chance of resonating with a far broader audience, with much more people. Look, we're all here sitting here. We're all agreeing that Jaws, that's a big nope. Nope.
Yeah,
that's a big nope.
Yep.
Any film that actually influenced the public to go out and murder a whole species is pretty damn scary.
They murder us back, okay?
See,
I saw a shark at work
I'm
the
not
other
the only
day
one who
while I
has
was on
this
the
fear.
boat. Pulled my service weapon. No joke.
I've swam with sharks. Y'all are a bunch of wusses.
You shut your mouth. They're just saving
Good for
you for
you.
last.
Now, I will say it was not
flavor.
intentional, but I swam with sharks.
So
And
Paul,
we
what is
didn't mention what kind of shark it was. Like
One was a
shark.
tiger and 3 were nurses.
So I will see
You
your
had
shark
no
and
problem
raging
with the nurse. That
piranha.
tiger though was sizing you up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if I was a little smaller at that time, he would have taken a chomp. But,
He's like, Paul's looking good. I hope he's as good. He's going to be as good as his work. That's right.
this was
So
when I was a
Paul,
kid. This is a long time ago.
Get some of his
Paul,
books out here. I want to eat him with those.
So Paul, what is it that makes something stick in your mind for horror that makes it last in the zeitgeist?
I think part of it is when you're first exposed to it, but I think it's also there's we have a feedback loop now, big time feedback loop.
Yeah.
I could throw a rock and it could hit a horror fan who knows what the thing is. I can throw a rock and hit a lot of people or Gen X who know what the thing is. What's scary is their kids know more about the thing than they do, because it's like when we were kids, we saw during the 70s and 80s all the black and white movies from the 50s and 60s every Saturday. For a stretch from 1 to 6, you got the mainline all the B movies from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah,
this is the same thing. But those films in particular have a striking perfection to them. The thing hits all the beats, every single one of them. You got isolation, you got paranoia, you've got the uncanny, you've got the unknown, and you've got, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here while reality's crashing around you. And then when you got Alien, you've got exactly the same when we were talking about it earlier. It's like the first science fiction horror slasher. But it's iconic because of the setting. It's iconic because of every little beat that is in there. It all fits together. We care for the characters, and then we get to watch them get killed one at a time. That's what makes it work, because you give a shit.
And that's it right there.
And now
I give a shit factor. Yeah.
So now it's time to see Declan and Tony can top that, because that was a good answer.
No.
We're all just like, no, that you nailed it.
All right. So as we wrap this up, I've got one quick question for the road, and you can tell me either as a movie, a book, a comic. I don't care what format, but what is your favorite horror franchise of all time? Product, franchise, whatever, and why? We're gonna start with you, Griff.
Well, I'm going to go with two answers. One for film, and that's Alien, and one for books, and that's I can't remember if it's The Red Lear or A Red Lear by David Drake.
Okay, Steve.
Well, I don't want to just copy Griff.
Look up when you say that, like the Brady Bunch.
It's okay, man. You gotta look down. It's okay. You can do that. Wait, let me give it a halo.
Yeah, there we go. How about okay? Well, then I'll steal it before anyone else does, and I'll say The Thing for the film.
Yeah,
Pastor.
Because
how do we not mention that?
For me, the reason I know, but I'm saying in a different context, so it's totally different. But I think, and it is actually something that you were talking about, Paul, and that's that it's everything in The Thing just feels perfect, in that every reaction that they have to the thing, if in your head you're thinking the exact same lines.
That moment when he goes, "You got to be fucking kidding me!" When the head gets up and walks away.
Exactly. Yeah. And then in literature and books, I point to Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. It takes place, it's turn of the century, it's like 1699. And it perfectly walks that line of what the question is of what is supernatural and what is superstition. And it's perfect.
Nice.
Okay. Declan, you get to weigh in next.
Okay. Favorite individual property is probably Jaws. It's standard, straight-up monster movie with the added element of you can't see the bloody thing until it's about to kill you, and it's almost always omnipresent and darn near omnipotent because, again, you can't do much if you just see it when it's ready to kill you. But as far as horror franchises go, I don't think anything really beats the original Universal monster films of the 40s.
My man.
Yeah, starting with Dracula and Karloff and Lugosi, etc., and going straight, okay, fine, I got a little goofy near the end, but with Everybody Meets Everybody Else, and why is John Carradine trying to play Dracula with a southern accent? But aside from that, no, it's almost a perfect series of monster movies.
Okay, Tony.
I'm gonna end as I started with. There we go.
Oh, Alien.
Cthulhu.
No. It's Cthulhu.
Oh, it was blurring out. Okay, I can see it now. Cthulhu. Okay.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, now we can see it.
What about you, Paul?
Oh God!
Yeah, this is the Steve Hickman statue that he did. That he created the statue in order to paint it for the cover of Bane's Cthulhu mythos stories of Robert E. Howard. Yes, yeah, oh yes. So this is
so good.
Enduring. Just notion that Lovecraft implanted that has inspired so many people and continues to inspire because he's so just freaking scary.
All right, Paul, you get to weigh in. What is the all-time favorite for you horror property?
Well, they've stolen everything, so
we did it, everyone. We did
it. Video game franchises. I would say Dead Space is my absolute drop dead favorite part of the fun because it perfectly blends science fiction and horror. And I mean every single drop of horror in every possible way you can imagine. Psychological reality fades away. You got people turning into things. You got stuff where you hear something around the corner. It could just be a can getting knocked around, or it could be something getting ready to eat your face. I love that entire series because of the claustrophobia, the fact that you get pinned against the wall. And the only bad part about it is once the first one rocks your world, and the rest of them you're just kind of like, okay, yeah, that was kind of scary, but I've kind of used to this. The first one, though, the first time you encounter all that stuff, it is like watching Alien blended with The Thing, only you're the character trying to get the hell out of there. And it really just hits you hard. And it's one of those games where you may have to stop playing on more than one occasion because it is pretty goddamn scary. So there.
Yeah.
So if I was gonna list one, I'd probably go back to Hitchcock's The Bird. I don't know that movie. I think it was 1963. There's something about that, just whenever you walk outside, you just never know when it was coming for you. That did it.
Yeah.
And the acting was pretty good too. It's back when they actually pretended to act instead of relied on green screens for everything.
Ow. That's only mostly true.
So what about you, Nick? What is your all-time favorite?
I'd say on film it's the Hellraiser series.
Okay.
And part of the book too, because after I saw the first Hellraiser, I was like friends with the metalheads that were into that kind of stuff, and like Megadeth's my favorite band. So I was like, yeah, okay, cool, I'll read it. So I read those books. Well, the book, and then I was like,
Hellbound Heart.
Wait a minute, the Hellbound Heart. I'm like, why the hell is the priest female in this? And now I'm super excited because Friday, I get to see my priest. Super stoked. What I loved about that franchise is it really touches on the correlation between pleasure and pain. It's very sadomasochist, I guess. I'm giving way too much away to our fans here.
Come on, the movie's 37 years old.
Yeah, but it's still awesome, and I watch it like at least once a month. I don't know.
If you need a spoiler alert, I'm simply saying you have plenty of fucking time. That's all.
No, not spoiler alert. Spoiler alert on me, like the shit that I'm into.
Oh. Never mind.
I feel like I said too much there.
Oh, geez. All right, and on that happy note,
I got a literature answer too, JR. You always complain that I don't read enough because I'm a grunt. So I read a book that didn't have pictures in it. Finally. No, a lot of things from Edgar Allan Poe scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Not just the classic Raven, which is kind of scary, but he has other stuff going on there. Mask of the Red Death, Murders in the Rue Morgue. I mean, there's so much going on with that guy. And what I loved about his writing is that it puts so much information into my brain that my imagination is like, I'm about to jack you up, kid.
Yeah.
I'm going to come up with some crazy, crazy shit. And it did. And like, and that's what I love about horror. Anything that's going to boil my blood, anything that's going to raise my blood pressure, anything that's going to make me afraid to go to sleep at night because my imagination is going to run wild. Anything that I wake up the next day, 2-3 days later, and I'm still thinking about aspects of what I had saw or read and still generates fear.
Yeah.
It's awesome horror. And I don't care if it's low budget or high budget.
I lost an entire summer to Bram Stoker's Dracula. So
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Holy crap.
Yeah.
That, like, we asked it earlier, like, what is American horror? Someone said Lovecraft. And I disagree. I think it's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I think that is classic, true American horror. And I think that's what started most of this stuff. And it started on a dare at a dinner party, which I think is awesome.
Yes.
So I would love to have you all for dinner and then create a dare.
Yeah.
When you say have us for dinner.
After the Hannibal Lecter comments, yeah.
Not regular dinner, like we're actually going to enjoy food that's not made from people, like maybe carne asada.
It was a summer spent in Geneva with her husband and her husband's lover and her husband's lover's wife, and they were in Geneva, Switzerland, enjoying
Read about the
themselves.
Romantic poets. It was a huge incest fest. It made Fleetwood Mac look like a double date. It just
count me in.
All right. On that happy note.
Yeah.
On that happy note, so we promised you an hour, dear listener, and I promised the guests.
You lied.
Only missed it by a little bit, and if I let them start this can of worms, we'll be here for another 2. So instead, I'm going to ask you, panelists,
part 2.
we might have to. And listeners, you can tell us in the comment section what you think. If you want more, we can book another episode. Even ask the same guest back if you enjoyed this that much. But what is everyone working on, and how can the listeners and viewers find them? And we'll start with you, Griff.
I get started with a lot.
Because you're at the top.
So I've got a couple of short stories coming out in different anthologies from Baen, one of which is an homage to two of our friends or friends of Baen that passed away in the last couple of years, and World's Long Lost. And then I just had one come out in No Game for Knights. And then I've got a short story I am working on for the third noir anthology, which is my fantasy horror with the protagonist being the main bad gal, Necromancer. And that's the second story in that cycle. I've got a novel I'm working on as well for it. And then I'm working on another novel for alternate history for the third and book with Eric Flint that we were able to plot out before he passed away. So I need to finish that up and get it out there as well. But yeah, a lot of short stories. And I believe actually one of my co-authored things with Chuck Gannon and Mike Massa and Casey Azell is actually coming out. Chris Kennedy. I'm sorry. Chris Kennedy is actually coming out with Tony. I'm not sure when that is.
I'm not sure either.
Got a few things coming.
All right. What about you, Declan? I'm sure you've got 12 books that'll launch before this even airs, but
maybe. I've got Blue Saint coming out from Tuscany Bay. I've got 4 St. Tommy short stories coming out from Tuscany Bay. I'm in an anthology called Shoot the Devil, which was originally going to be Punching Demons, but somebody changed it to High Ammunition on Me. And that's with John C. Wright, N.R. LaPointe, Jaji Lamplighter Wright, that sort of thing. I'm currently working on getting my 4th space opera published from Tuscany Bay Press. I'm working on self-publishing my vampire romance sequel series. It's vampire romance if you don't mind the rocket propelled grenades, which I don't do romance. I do blow 'em ups. I don't even do shoot 'em ups. Things just blow up. But I'm on book 3 of that, currently writing it, and I have 2 more before I just say screw it and hit the publication on all of them. Hold on. I know that's only 5 or 6 books, and a few short stories, but give me time. I'm busy moving.
Fair. All right. And how can listeners find you?
You can find me almost anywhere. I'm at declanfinn.com, which is a blogger site. I'm on Substack now. Pick a social media platform. I'm probably on it, except for BitChute. I haven't been able to figure out how that works yet. I'm on Amazon for my books and a whole bunch of other platforms now. Thankfully, I've gotten away from Kindle, etc. All of my books will soon be available via Baen.com. Thank you for the reminder. They're going to be up in a few weeks and/or months. I forget what the timeline was. So, and I do recommend going through the Baen.
All right. So speaking of the Baen, we've got Steve Diamond. So what are you writing right now? What are you working on? And how can listeners find you?
Well, you can always find me on the social medias, the Twitters, the Facebooks. The Writer Dojo is the podcast, the Writing Advice podcast that I host with my best buddy, Larry Correa. Stay tuned. We do, depending on when this airs, there will have either just aired or about to air an episode with Tony Weisskopf that was excellent that we recorded while we were all down at FenCon. Now, as for what I'm writing, I've got kind of like Griff, I've got a bunch of short stories coming out. Unlike Griff, I turned in my story for the third noir anthology already.
Well,
so, I mean...
Burn.
I turned it in yesterday, so sorry. I turned it in already.
So there.
The story, that story that I turned in for that one, it's my as I lovingly call the werewolf cop story. So that's my supernatural Bosch. Main character is a werewolf, obviously, if I wasn't clear. So I'm working on the novel for that, and then a little science fiction thingy on the side too, based on a random comment Tony made at FenCon. So I'm doing a little science fiction-y stuff.
That's always so dangerous.
I know. So that's what I'm working on right now.
And so, Tony, what are you working on? I know you're an editor and you run a certain publishing company that maybe people have heard of, but what are you working on right now? Well, the one you're most excited at, well, that's not fair. You can't pick between your children. What are you working right now? We'll not qualify it.
We are working on putting together the spring 2024 season. We're putting together our list. January, by the way, Griff, is when Mission Critical is coming out. So yeah, I love all my babies equally. I love all the books equally, and I am enthusiastic about every single one of my authors in exactly the same way. So,
and you're doing really well since you lost your intern, Christopher Rocchio. Nobody's getting your coffee, but you're surviving.
We stumble along without Christopher. So Christopher has been participating in some of our anthologies as well. If you're looking for more of the Sun Eater series, looking for some of the really cool stuff, very dark stuff, look to Bane anthologies for those too.
Christopher and Declan are two guests that I was told by Cisca I'm not allowed to interview by myself anymore because we get nerdy about history and the guests go to sleep. The listeners go to sleep and they're like, no more of that, JR. We've had enough. So, I see nothing wrong with it, Declan. I'm just saying they're uncultured.
Crazy.
All right. What about you, Paul? What are you writing and how can listeners find you?
God, what am I writing right now? I have so many works in progress. I'm not even sure who the hell I am anymore. I'm currently working on the final book in the Black series to finish that off, even though it probably won't be published till into 2023, beginning 2024. I don't remember. Working on that, which means I have to start recording that thing at some point. And then I've got I'm writing 2 different sci-fi horror books for future stuff. I'm once again revisiting Suits because Station 3 had a lot of Suits. Everybody's liked my Suits stories, so I'm going to stick with that for a little while because it's so much fun to watch people in augmented suits get their freaking asses kicked by things that they don't know exist. It's just so much fun. And I guess you can find me, the best place to find me is at shadowpublications.com. You could probably find me on any of the podcast apps out there. And if you want free serialized fiction, I have a shitload for you. So come to shadowpublications.com. Check me out.
So to be clear, his podcast is the Dead Robot Society podcast. It's a writing advice podcast. Steve Diamond's podcast is Writer's Dojo, another writing advice podcast. Different angles, but they're both enjoyable if you're interested in that side of the pen and paper. As usual, all the links will be in the show notes, so be sure to scroll down a little bit, read, and stalk whoever caught your attention. Try not to eat them, though. That's frowned upon. Griff might have to pay you a visit if you do kill people, and he's ready to retire, so don't make him do extra work.
I'm retired. I'm actually retired. Thank you. Allegedly.
Oh, outstanding. Allegedly.
Just remember, Steve has got the pickaxe and the shovel, so as long as we know where Steve is, we've got a guy.
It's one of the places
collection. You can also find me. I didn't actually shill for that. It was for the Bane Free Radio Hour. I'm one of the hosts for the Bane Free Radio Hour, and I interview authors on there for the company. And
so you're a company man. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, over on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show. Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For all the hate mail, please mail Cisca at blastersandbladespodcast.com. She wants to hear from you. We have a Facebook group where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, be sure to share them there. We might even care. If you want to reach out to our guests, we can have questions about what they're working on, etc., we can forward those along as well. But again, their links will be in the show notes. You can follow us on our website, which is anchor.fm/blasters and blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters and blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on. We will also soon, allegedly, have our website proper going up. Cisca is recovering from Dragon Con and then football season with her spawn. It happens when your kids play sports, but maybe by Halloween some year we'll have it ready. But the domain is ours, so that's like half the battle, I'm told, for the computer types. And then finally, you can support the show more directly on buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders. Outstanding. All right. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And if I mess that up, not my fault. I blame Cisca.